Good morning, and welcome to the Sunday's worship service of the Highland Trinity United Church of Christ. My name is Gary Blaine, and I am the pastor of that congregation. Thank you for joining us today or sometime during the week. We get a lot of viewers who come and watch it some other day, and that's perfectly fine. We're glad that we can be of service to you. I'd like to begin this morning by reading from the book of Ruth. I'm sure you've paid attention to the book of Ruth recently, but just in case, let's listen to what this story is, or at least part of it. I'm reading from Ruth chapter 1, verses 6 through 18. Now, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her two sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her two sons and her husband. When she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughter-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home and another husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud, and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? And am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried to them? No, my daughters, it is better for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." At this point they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and to the gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped arguing with her. Dr. Daniel Schul opened the door to his office early Thursday morning. He shoveled over to his desk piled high with books, professional journals, and papers to grade. On his brown leather chair was an envelope with his name beautifully scripted on the envelope. Inside there was a card that read, "Dr. Schul, I am one of the night cleaning ladies. We have never met, but I've been cleaning your office for the last 13 years. I have heard wonderful things about you from students and faculty, and from staff. Would you have a few minutes to spend with me late one afternoon? I could come in early before my shift starts. I promise not to keep you too late, but I am desperate to tell someone my story. I have lived in shame most of my life, and I would prefer not to die so heavily burdened. You can leave your answer on the back of this envelope. Just put it in your ashtray by your chair. I will understand if you do not have the time. Thank you, Orpah, Moab." Of course, Dr. Schul left Orpah a note offering to meet with her Thursday evening. He made arrangements for his secretary to stay over with the promise of a gift certificate for her gift certificate for the Varsity. The Varsity is one of Atlanta's most famous hamburger joints. Her office was just down the hall, but within earshot of Dr. Schul's. Orpah was quite punctual. She tapped lightly on the door. Dr. Schul welcomed her and invited her to take a seat on the leather couch. He left the door slightly ajar. Orpah sat on the edge of the couch. Her spine was erect, her legs crossed very tightly. Avoiding eye contact, she began immediately. "Thank you for seeing me, Dr. Schul. I know you're used to seeing more important people than me. I don't know how much you charge. I've got university insurance and I can pay off the deductible if you will allow payments." "Orpah," replied Dr. Schul gently, "I have an agreement with the university. I am pleased to receive whatever your insurance covers, and you need not worry about a deductible. Your story is much more important to me. So please, how can I help you today?" He paused and then asked her, "Do you mind if I smoke?" "No, please," she answered. "Go right ahead. You smoke a pipe, don't you?" Yes, the psychiatrist answered. "How did you know?" "I clean your ashtrays, remember?" Dr. Schul laughed. "Yes, of course you do. Now, what would you like to talk about?" "I have not had an easy life," Orpah began. "Not since my husband died. He passed many years ago. For a while, I stayed with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, Ruth and Naomi. They were wonderful to me. And the strangest thing is that they lost both of their husbands soon after my mother-in-law's husband died. Well, we wound up living in the same house, trying to make ends meet. I loved them. We became great friends, sharing everything together, our money, our grief, our sorrows. but times were hard. The country was in an economic depression and we could not survive financially. We would go to different soup kitchens and hygiene pantries. We barely scraped by. The times were so bad, even the food pantries stopped opening every week. And we would spend every Saturday just going from different churches and different food banks trying to get enough groceries that would get us through the week. Every place had long lines and people sometimes got into fistfights because someone tried to cut in line. Finally, things got so bad, those few kitchens started shutting down. My mother-in-law said she thought things were just going to get worse. She had also heard from some of her people that things were not so bad back home, and she thought we should all go back to our own homes, where we came from. Of course, we did not even have enough money to buy a bus ticket. We figured if we took the state highways, we could walk home, though it would take us several days to do that. You know, you can't hitchhike on the turnpike. I still had my backpack from college. Ruth and Naomi packed up what they could in small suitcases, and we struck out. Together, 3 sisters. Of course, nobody was going to pick up 3 hitchhikers at one time, so we walked on. Some truckers passed us by and blew their horns at us. A couple of cars whizzed by yelling obscenities. Most everybody left us alone. We slept behind a barn the first night and then under a bridge the second. We walked past a peach orchard and helped ourselves to some fresh fruit. On the 3rd morning, the road split off into different directions. We were encouraged to go to our own homes. Ruth refused. She said she loved Naomi too much to leave her at this point, and there wasn't much for her to go home to. "I'm going wherever you go," she said. But I wanted to see my own people, so we all hugged each other and we wept. My backpack seemed to get a lot heavier as I walked by myself. I heard later that Naomi and Ruth made it back. People heard about Ruth's loyalty and celebrated her throughout the community. The dynamic duo, that I call them, are still highly revered by those people. I wasn't so lucky. The morning we split off, I walked about an hour. A big 18-wheeler pulled up beside me, and the trucker asked if I wanted a ride. It was already getting hot, so I said yes and jumped up into the rig. We drove a few hours when I fell asleep. The driver pulled off on a side road. The next thing I knew, he was all over me. I couldn't keep him off of me. In no time at all, I was on the bed of his cab, and he was on top of me. He hit me several times, and I passed out. When I came to, I was lying on the grass beside the road. My clothes were torn, and the contents of my backpack were strewn all over the place. There was a cow pond nearby, and I waded in to clean myself off. A big knot swelled up on my forehead, and I had a split lip. He must have punched me pretty good because my guts and my ribs were sore. I put my few possessions back in my pack and walked up to the highway. I managed to straggle onto my mother's front porch about 8 o'clock in the evening. Mom rushed out the front door and hugged me. She took my face in her weathered hands and kissed me. I winced, and Mom said, "Oh my God, what's happened to you? You're hurt." Mom ushered me into the house and sat me down at the kitchen table. Pouring hydrogen peroxide on a cotton ball, she dabbed at my lip and forehead. She put the coffee on and fixed me a fried egg sandwich. About 6 weeks later, I was throwing up every morning. I got one of those home pregnancy tests, and sure enough, I was with child. For a widow to show up pregnant in my hometown was not acceptable. By 5 months, I was showing. I went for a walk one evening, and when I got home, my backpack was sitting on the front porch, and the door was locked. I wandered around trying to find a place to stay. Friends let me stay the night a couple of evenings, but my welcome was soon short-lived. I tried family shelters, but they required that I apply for a job during daylight hours. Well, there were not many jobs available, and nobody would hire a pregnant woman. I went into labor in a community clinic and delivered a 13-pound baby boy. He grew up big, so big others called him a giant. Dr. Schul interrupted. "Excuse me, Orpah, can I pour you a cup of tea?" "That would be very nice, thank you," Orpah said. "I'm afraid it will be quite strong," said Dr. Schul. "Oh, that's fine," replied Orpah. "I still have a shift to work." Dr. Schul asked, "So, after the baby was born, what did you do, Orpah? How did you manage?" Orpah's face blanched and then turned red. "Well, I'm embarrassed to talk about it, but I became a working girl on the streets of Atlanta. It was the only thing I could do to support my son. I had to make a living and feed him. Without a husband, there was no one to support me. The rumors about me were deadly. I was not welcome in our house of worship, and you wouldn't believe the rumors, like the one that I slept with 100 men and a dog in one night. I couldn't even get a reference, much less a real job. That is the story of poor women all over the world, all through history." Orpah sat up even straighter on the edge of the couch. She crossed her arms as if to brace herself. She waited for some kind of attack or rebuke from Dr. Schul. So you did what you had to do to survive, muttered Dr. Shul. Yes, said Orpah defensively. I'm not proud of it, but we survived. You survived, said Dr. Shul, in a reassuring tone of voice, and you did everything you could. You did a very fine job, I'd say. Orpah looked surprised. What do you mean? Orpah, responded Dr. Shul. Do you know the difference between guilt and shame? Orpah did not respond. Guilt is when you take some kind of action that violates your own conscience, your own sense of right and wrong. It can also be a failure to act on your part, but deep down inside, you know that you made a choice that breaks your own moral code. Most importantly, guilt is the self-reflection that you have not lived your life authentically. You have not been true to your genuine self. Prostitution is not who you are, but you felt compelled to survive, and that was the only way you knew how. So in one sense, Orpah, you acted responsibly, even though you knew it did not contribute one bit to the meaning of your life. You felt guilty on account of your unfulfilled life. There is an old Hasidic story about Rabbi Susha. Shortly before he died, Rabbi Susha said, "When I get to heaven, they will not ask me, 'Susha, why were you not Moses?' Instead, they will ask, 'Why were you not Susha? Why did you not become what only you could become?'" The question for you, Orpah, is not so much the bad things you did, but who you did not become. And I want to tell you, that kind of guilt can be a good thing, a very useful tool in your life. This guilt always keeps open the possibility of who you might become. If you do not feel guilt, you will never know your potential. Orpah sat very quietly, trying to absorb what Dr. Shul was saying to her. So what is shame? Shame is what other people make you feel about yourself. Shame is the condemnation not only of what actions you have taken, but who you are. Shame is the public denial of your worth and being a rebuke to your identity as a human being and who you yet might become. Sadly, shame often comes from the very people closest to us. It usually begins with family, especially mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, but often from teachers and clergy. More often than not, shame is a projection of their own sense of worthlessness. Shame is an imposition of their fear, their anger, and prejudice on your soul. More often than not, shame is focused on the least important things about you, such as the color of your skin, or your gender, or your ability. And yes, shame is the public condemnation of anything you might have done to violate the social norms. Irrespective of the motives or needs that prompted that action. There is nothing in shame that is redemptive. It can bring everlasting damage to a person's sense of worth. It is society's failure, but it always feels like your own. Shame narrows the horizon of your potential. Like a black veil, shame is the shadow of death entombing your future. Shame always comes from your community and circles of families and friends. The problem is, we cannot be human beings without other people. Our identity comes from our relationships, and yet those very relationships can shame us and condemn us to a lifetime of self-recrimination and eternal self-doubt. As my mentor, Carl Jung, once said, shame is soul-eating emotion. Orpah looked down at the now cup of cold tea, tears streaming down her face. You know, I did not feel that way when I was married or even with Ruth and Naomi. I wasn't sure who I was or what I could be after I left them. But suddenly my life was thrust into chaos. That's what rape will do to you. That's what poverty will do to you. And then to have everyone blame you for the actions of men saying boys will be boys is not only dismissive of their behavior, but dismissive of me. Don't I count for something? And how do I crawl back out of this deep pit, Dr. Schul? How do I recover myself? You have already started, dear one, answered Dr. Schul. You have already started. There was a long pause. Dr. Schul gulped down the last swallow of his teacup and then started picking the old tobacco and ash out of his pipe. With much deliberation, he repacked it and struck a match. I have an offer, Dr. Schul said. I would like to invite you to see me, let's say every month until the end of the year. I want you to tell me more of your stories. In fact, I would like to invite you to write them down for me. I want to hear more about that giant baby and what became of him. Get one of those college-ruled essay books from the campus bookstore and tell your story. What good is that going to do me? Protested Orpah, with a hint of frustration in her voice. No one wants to read it. No one will read it. Or do you think it is a story not worth hearing? Said Dr. Schul. If that is the case, shame is still your master. And besides, why should men write all the stories? Don't let them think that they have had the final and everlasting word. If you write and tell your story, a little reasonable doubt slips into the history books. Do you think that no one has heard of the story of Orpah by accident? Or has no one heard the story of Orpah because men control the presses? But I'm so angry. I'm so hurt. No one wants to hear that. They'll think I'm just whining, protested Orpah. Or bitching, mused Dr. Schul. Once again, that is your self-doubt speaking. Is your anger worthless? Is there no place in the hearts of men for the weeping of women and children? Besides, every writer knows that the most tedious part of their work is editing the second, third, fourth time. Now, you cannot afford an editor, so buy lots of erasers. But never doubt the power of your own suffering. Never doubt the truth of your story. Again, Orpah stammered, but they just think I'm a whore or an infidel. Dr. Schul chuckled. Okay, let's go back to what I said about shame being a projection of the prosecutors of human worth. They are merely projecting the prostitution of their own values and the infidelity of their own principles. Now, let me tell you a little secret about the imaginations of men and some women. The very thing that they condemn may be their darkest desire. Their public rebuke is often their deepest obsession and coveted fantasy. And that's not about you. That's about their own tormented cravings. Now let me tell you another secret. No one, and I mean no one, is above that kind of temptation. So tell your story, Orpah. Let your truth bear its witness. For the first time, Orpah relaxed and fell into the warmth of the soft leather couch. Her hands rested gently in her lap. She breathed deeply. Do you know your pipe tobacco smells like maple syrup? She laughed. Now I'm hungry. Well, what time does your shift start? Asked Dr. Schul. I've got about an hour, said Orpah. Well, there's a Waffle House just down the street. Let's go get some waffles and maple syrup. My treat. Oh, I would love that, giggled Orpah. But before we go, can we schedule my next appointment? Absolutely, said Dr. Schul. He went over to his desk calendar and took the fountain pen out of his front pocket of his jacket. 1 month from now. I'd like to invite you to join me in a moment of prayer. Of course, we want to pray for the President of the United States and his family, and the 207,000 people so far that have died from coronavirus or who are struggling with it now. Some who are discovering that their after effects from having coronavirus, particularly with heart issues and lung, could be a lifetime problem for them. We ask that we would also pray for those who are afflicted by the deep divisions of this nation. We pray for truth. We pray for certainty as much as we are allowed, understanding that this is a new disease. This coronavirus is not something we've struggled with before, and information changes, and when information changes, so do our practices. And let us give thanks for those men and women of science, of medicine, who are spending their days and nights struggling with this dread disease. Let us give thanks for doctors and nurses and first responders and healthcare workers in every facility you can imagine, doing their very best to hold back the stem of this disease, who favors no person, no gender, no class, no political affiliation, no age. And let us give thanks for their service and thank them personally whenever we have the opportunity to do that. I can tell you, as the chaplain at Showalter Villa, the burden is incredibly difficult for them. And my job at this point seems to be to encourage them, bolster their spirits, and keep them going to care for our wonderful residents. And I think that's true for chaplains all over the United States, regardless of the kind of facility that they're working in, be it a prison or a clinic or a hospital. And I'm asking that we not make this prayer just for the day, but throughout the rest of this disease. And hold them in our hearts daily and give them comfort. And I want to say to children that you too can make this prayer. You're not too young. You're not too young to say thank you, doctor, nurse, first responder, firefighter, police officer. I believe in you, and you have my prayers too. And now may the Lord bless and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Deep, deep peace. Thank you all, and God bless you.